Hello, my name is Gary Gomes. I am here to talk with you about Vedic astrology and also other aspects of life, and also how it affects us in the world today. The last session I had a small segment on relationships in astrology, and it's really interesting area to look at. A lot of people are looking for the right romantic partner. There have been a lot of breakups over the past couple of years because of the presence of Rahu in Gemini. Gemini is a sign which is, and this is Indian Gemini, it's called Mithuna or Mituna. And it actually refers to, the sign itself actually refers to couples. So in Western astrology, relationships are judged by, especially long contracted relationships, are covered by signs like Libra. So Libras are considered, that's considered to be the sign connected with relationships. The only difficulty with Libra overall is the planet that gets exalted there is Saturn, so that tends to make it long-term, heavy-duty, long durational relationships. And Gemini is a sign connected with friendships, but it's also connected much more intimately with romantic love, excitement, those kinds of things. And with Rahu passing through Gemini, I've seen a lot of clients breaking up, getting close to breaking up, essentially leaving relationships, filing for divorce, deciding they need to file for divorce. This was particularly more intense even last year, when Saturn was in Sagittarius directly aspecting Gemini. And one of the viewers asked for the factors which make a relationship work in Indian astrology. And it's really sort of a complicated matter. It's not simple by any stretch of the imagination. Where I left off in the last show, I was talking about certain things. The sun and the moon signs should be, for immediate attraction, sun and moon signs should be identical. Okay, so if a man's sun and a woman's moon are in the same sign, that's considered to be almost an identical relationship, or almost an ideal relationship for attraction. That does not necessarily mean the relationship will last for a long time, but it does mean there'll be an attraction between these two individuals, because the man will be very, very forthright regarding the characteristics of that sign or its placement, and the woman will be receptive to that. So it's often said, the woman often decides whether or not the relationship will happen. As a matter of fact, the woman always decides whether or not the relationship will happen, at least from an astrological standpoint. Or whether or not she accepts the relationship, let's put it that way. Okay, a man can back out and say, I don't want to be in this relationship. But the other thing you have is, there are other factors that are looked at, and unfortunately a lot of the sun and then the moon, you can sort of, if you have like a basic astrology program which you can get online and you can match the two signs up, that's pretty easy to find out. The other things which are essentially supposed to be really good indicators of a relationship compatibility are essentially Venus and Mars being in the same sign or aspecting each other. Sun and moon aspecting each other is also considered good, although not quite as strong as the sun-moon attraction. Sun-moon being in the same sign attraction. And usually it's Mars and Venus in our society. It's Mars and Venus because, and And in traditional Indian astrology, or in some forms of, I would say, in some forms of traditional Indian astrology, the idea was that Jupiter was the indicator of a spouse in a woman's chart, and Venus was the indicator of a spouse in a man's chart. From what I've learned and from what I heard from a very well-known Vedic astrologer, the late Chakrapani Lal, is that essentially Venus is the indicator of spouse in both people's charts. So whether or not it be a heterosexual couple, a gay couple, a lesbian couple, anybody, Venus is going to be the planet which is really going to determine what kind of spouse you have, or what kind of long-term relationship partner you have. Jupiter comes from, I think, from a concept that is cemented in Indian culture, in which Jupiter essentially is the guide or the guru or the leader of the family. And essentially, so Jupiter comes out, gives good advice to everybody. Is sort of like if you think back to our culture, sort of like a father knows best kind of a scenario. For those of you familiar with that show, so dad gives wise advice and mother heralds the children. It's very, in our society, it seems to be at least a little bit outdated, except in certain enclaves. And Jupiter is not really usually the indicator of the spouse. It's usually the indicator of an advisor or somebody who gives guidance to the family, and that's what the father is supposed to do. But that's changed a lot over the years. And in a more traditional society like India, that would also be true. And India is slowly changing as well. So a lot of Western societies, a lot of traditional societies are changing. So Venus is considered to be the primary significator of spouse. If Venus is well placed in the chart, you'll end up usually getting a fairly nice person, and you'll be attracted to individuals who are nice or decent or kind or giving, basically, because Venus, like Jupiter, is a very giving planet. But when you get to actual compatibility, Venus and Mars essentially it gives the sexual attraction or the magnetism between the two signs. And in Indian astrology, you also have an additional couple of charts to consider. One's called an Navamsha, which divides the basic chart into 9 divisions, and I could explain the map, but it'll be a little bit longer, and I don't want to waste time explaining the calculational basis of it. And the Navamsha is usually built into virtually every Indian astrology or Vedic astrology program. So Navamshas so it's called the 9th division. It's a general indicator of the person's luck in life. And the person's luck in life is often determined by the spouse. So that would tend to make sense, And Navamsha combinations of Venus and Mars or Sun and Moon, those will tend to be also good compatibility indicators. There's also another feature called Mars affliction, which becomes very important in an Indian chart. Indian culture, at least in the old days, would not necessarily take affinity to a divorce. Essentially, in India, you were married for life. Older couples, and still to this day in India, there are arranged marriages. And there's a condition called Mars affliction, in which Mars sits in the 12th, the second, some would say the first rather than the second house, the 4th house, the 7th, the 8th house of the chart. And that gives a condition in which the spouse can't function well with a partner for a long time. It doesn't necessarily mean the partner's an evil person, but from what I've seen, the person tends to get taken advantage of by the spouse. And usually there's an attraction there because Mars is connected with passion just as much, if not more so, than Venus is. And the other thing is, when you start considering there are Mars affliction combinations from other planets like the Moon and Venus, a lot of people have this combination. So a great many people have really problematic patterns in their chart for relationships. There are combinations which are tremendously good. So let's say if Venus is in the 7th house exalted, the person ends up with a really fine relationship partner, and the relationship can last the entire lifetime. But that's also considering whether or not other planets are equally well placed. So when you get into, and the final factor, the final two factors I want to talk about just briefly are something called Kuta points, K-U-T-A, and those are essentially points of psychological compatibility judged from the Moon. So Mars affliction, the way to avoid Mars affliction, just to go back to that for a second, is you marry somebody with Mars affliction, or you wait until you're in your 30s to marry. That's really, or else you end up getting married to a spouse you won't be spending a lot of time with. And that's the typical cure for Mars affliction. One of the problems with Mars affliction is you're always attracted to people you can't function with that well. So it sort of compels you towards passionate relationships, with passionate relationships tends to be the ones that will burn out quickly. It doesn't mean every single passionate relationship will. I have to pull my hair back so I don't look quite so much like Adolf Hitler. And so a passionate relationship can actually last, but certain elements of the passionate relationship will fade out, and it will evolve into friendships, which is really what long-term relationships turn into a great deal of the time. It doesn't mean you love the person any the less, but the physical part can fade away. Some relationships are fortunate, and that passion lasts throughout the entire lifetime. The other thing about Mars affliction is you can actually do what they call fake weddings, and you can actually marry an inanimate object or something before the actual marriage occurs. And this may sound a little bit like a cheat, but it's better than getting married to somebody in the first marriage turning out badly. So essentially, I have known people who've done this, and it seems to have worked for them. But in terms of compatibility, so we're talking about the Kuta points. The Kuta points are essentially a set of whether or not the person belongs to the same caste. And India uses caste, but they mean it. In this case, it's more metaphorical. So one person may be a Brahmin caste, another person may be so that means they're intellectually driven, or they like to philosophize about a great many things. They're curious about the world. Another person may be Vaishya, which is a merchant caste, and they're just more concerned with how much money and security they can bring into the family. So that doesn't mean that one caste is necessarily higher up than another is, or a better person than another one is. And there are people who serve called Shudras, and there's a fourth caste called Kshatriyas, and actually a fifth caste, which are outsiders. And I belong to an outsider caste, or I belong to what's called a butcher caste in my chart. And the butchers tend to be sort of like a little bit, they're outside of caste, they're not part of the formal structure of society. So, but they're not detrimental. Everybody has a function in these roles. And so caste is one factor. The most important factor, though, is Nadi, N-A-D-I. And Nadi relates to, so there's a factor connected with sex, the ability to have children, prosperity of the couple, etc., etc. But Nadi has to do with temperament. So it's not, and it's the highest point of this entire system. And temperament seems to be the most important factor in choosing a relationship. So if some person's very excitable, you want somebody who's calm, most of the time to calm them down, right? So, or if somebody's too calm, you want somebody who can light a fire under that individual and make them more aggressive or ambitious. So these two traits tend to be the most important, but there are 36 total points under the Kuda system. It's only based on the moon, but you can look at it from other planets and figure out whether or not your passion, your intellectual curiosity, your energy levels, your pride, your sense of self, your reflection, your calmness of mind. You can figure those out by using the same analysis, and those are useful tools. You can also see where planets intersect on the charts. You can run what's called a synastry chart in Western astrology. So let's say if a person's Saturn sits on another person's Venus, then that Saturn-Venus conjunction will tend to make a person a little bit depressed. They're in a relationship. They won't get a lot of joy out of it. The Venus person won't get a lot of joy out of it. And the Saturn person might feel like the relationship partner is looking for a good time too much. So all these things, and the planets are much more complicated than that, of course, but all these things are figured into a relationship reading. And finally, there's another significant point called Brigu points. And essentially, this is derived from a system of astrology called Nadi, which essentially determines pivotal points of contact in a chart. And so essentially, and this is taken from the moon Brigu point. And Brigu is the father or the grandfather of Shukra or Venus. And he's considered to be one of the greatest astrologers of all time, historically a legendary figure. Nobody really knows if he existed or not, but there's an entire school of astrology dedicated to Brigu. And Brigu Nandi Nadi, so these are different. There's some overlap with Parashari astrology, which is what I mostly deal with, but they're different. And essentially, Brigu astrology will tend to have very strong points of compatibility. And usually you look for points in the chart that are complementary or identical. So Brigu points are essentially calculated midpoints in the chart. And there's another calculated midpoint called the Yogi point, which I've done a lecture online or a discussion online about, which has to do with prosperity. So essentially these points determine both when a person's going to marry and also what kind of an individual they're going to get into a relationship with. So when we look at a chart, the Brigu points, and this is a much deeper conversation than what I'm covering today because I don't have time, and I may follow this up next week. The Brigu points tend to be very, very significant in terms of timing of astrology, in terms of timing based upon the major planetary period or major Rashi periods in the chart, and also in terms of transits. So you have all these factors to consider. And finally, as a capper, there's in B.B. Raman's book Muhurta, B.B. Raman says that if the woman's rising sign is in the same sign as the man's, but is ahead of the man's, that nullifies all problems with the relationship. So everything else, so they may have conflicts in other things, but that will essentially nullify a lot of the problems, or what they call doshas in the chart. So that's a very important technique, and I found that to be true. So without further ado, let me look at the world for you folks. I don't want to spend too much time dwelling on the world right now. It says March 4th when we're doing, March 6th when we're doing this, we've hit the major conjunction we've hit the condition under which we were supposed to be experiencing 9/11-like conditions right now. So we do have a very potentially serious virus. It's not exactly the same as the world blowing up. We're hitting or terrorism. We are having financial issues, but that seems to have flipped yesterday, and the stock market seems to be climbing up again. I don't think this particular virus outbreak will last much longer, to be honest with you. I think I'd be very surprised if it extends much past March 24th, as I said before. And I mean, it could, at least in terms of its accelerating spread. And I think one of the things that I would look at right now in terms of the now chart is, I'm looking for trouble spots in the world and predictions connected with the world, because I want to get to the astrology for the actual signs. But if I'm looking from the chart that I'm looking at right now, and this is what's called the Muhurta chart, we should expect problems in the middle of Turkey next week. So there's a little bit of a panic in Turkey. Maybe some of the virus will end up going there. Maybe there'll be attacks on the government. This is around the Ankara region. This isn't near Istanbul, and down all the way through South Africa and in Egypt. That looks like a kind of a troubled area. And we know that Turkey has been involved in a conflict with Syria for a while, so that's not really surprising. The moon is going over, the moon is intersecting with Venus, and I'm looking for contagion signs, and I'm looking for problem signs. So the moon-Venus conjunction is not bad. Let's see now. Iran is still going to be in trouble, at least with the virus. That doesn't look like it's changed. China actually has some evidence of a cure or a reversal of the outbreak. Some good medical traces showing up in China, so that could be good news. Mars is passing through Australia, so we could see the spread of the virus to Australia or Japan more intensely, and also Australia and Japan having different kinds of problems. And in terms of, the West Coast seems to be the most affected part of the country, in the United States right now in terms of the virus. It'll probably stop there in terms of major outbreaks. That's what I'm seeing from the chart. And I think the other part of the world that I'm a little bit concerned about right now is Brazil, because Brazil is having several negative lines pass over it right now. And Puerto Rico a little bit, but not as bad as Brazil is. And the major thing I'm looking at is Eastern Europe. Turkey, but again, I don't want people who know me from Turkey to get really upset about this. This looks like political issues. This looks like diplomatic issues. So I don't believe there'll be a full-scale war that'll break out in Turkey. So just to sum up, West Coast United States, Maine through eastern Brazil, and pretty much eastern Brazil. Parts of Europe, especially near Italy, are a little bit troublesome right now, but Italy looks like it's going to take a turnaround too in terms of health. And Turkey, political problems, but I don't think war. War still shows up on the western side, or conflict still shows up on the western side on the eastern side of Turkey, next to Syria. So that'll continue on for a while. And there should be some problems in, so Iran and Iraq do look threatened in terms of disease. China looks better though. China actually looks in a much better position than it has been before. And Australia and Japan look a little bit troubled, but this may not be disease. This may be other issues. The overall forecast for people and signs over the next month, and I've gone over this a few times, but I think you'll see a general improvement after March 15th. And as we go into April, especially April in particular, you'll see Aries will have a lot of career success in April, a lot of focus on career, and actually some luck in relationship life during that time as well. Taurus will have expenditures, it'll have some good luck, and again, this is Vedic Taurus, which goes from May 15th to June 15th. And it'll also have some career success, some expanded luck. Gemini should start to bring in some more money over the next month. It's actually had a little bit of a rough period, and career success is strong, but there'll be certain changes or shifts in career. So the career life will actually go into different directions. It'll actually start to improve and luck in career, especially in higher education matters, will improve as well. So there'll be more contacts with higher education. Cancer looks like it's going to have a good month in April. It looks like it's going to actually start to show some financial gains, some financial prosperity. When we go into April and May, Venus goes retrograde in Cancer's 11th house, so there should be some minor reversals of fortune, but that should be only temporary. Financially, relationship-wise, Cancer's relationship partners will still have a lot of burdens thrown onto them, but their luck will start to shift in late April. The relationship partners' luck will start to shift in late April for Cancers. For Aquarius, again, good for relationship luck, good for new contacts, good for overall career luck. I think you'll see over the next few months, this particular sign, Leo, will tend to do extremely well. And Virgo, again, has some good aspects. Venus is in the 8th house right now. It'll be in the 9th house by the end of it, before the end of April, and you'll actually start to see the sign experience a lot of good luck, but still a lot of more happiness in the home, less disruption than there has been. And they'll come around May 22nd, but there'll be more problems with children after March 22nd, excuse me. Libra actually looks like it's going to have a really good month, a lot of courage, a lot of ability to go forward with its plans and goals, but a lot of focus on home, but career status will be greatly enhanced over the next month. So it's going into April. Scorpio still has a lot of expenses, but it'll be spent on good things. It'll have a lot more courage. Home life will be calmer, easier to deal with, and relationship life will be a little bit problematic, but not horribly so. But career life looks better, and some increase in financial gains. Sagittarius still has Rahu in the 7th house and Ketu in the 1st, so although it'll be more optimistic, it'll have more beneficial aspects over the next couple of months. I think around April, you'll start to see it start to clear up, and luck in relationship life will change a great deal. Capricorn has Saturn in the 1st house, still a great deal of responsibility for this sign, and still a great many expenses connected with its desires or fulfilling its desires, but overall, not a bad month. Career life will actually get much more pleasant and much more amicable. Aquarius, the light's shining on Aquarius this month. It'll shine in the 2nd house next month. That means more money coming into Aquarius next month. And Jupiter will be in its 12th house. And so there'll be more expenses in April, but overall a good month. And last but not least, Pisces is showing a slight shift from feeling like it's the center of the world and supreme happiness to actually showing some gains, some financial gains, and some financial improvements. Career life will actually pick up, but there'll be some unexpected twists and turns, especially in April. And we'll spend some more time on relationship, and I'll try to cap that up a little bit. It's tough to do that without individual charts in front, but that's really the only way to do it properly. So that's it for me, and I just want to wish you a great week, and namaste.